Hey guys, Zach Mars here, and this is my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Okay, so this episode, House of the Nightmare Witch, is interesting in that the gang has to kind of pick up a temporary gang member because they're currently short one person because obviously Daphne is refusing to come back and is refusing to come back to work with Mystery Incorporated, so they had to pick up somebody else, somebody that they know and have not really worked with, but somebody they tolerate. But and then also there's an interesting thing where it's actually well, I'll get to that in a minute. But the episode opens up with two women who are currently dressed in stealth suits, and they're currently sneaking through Russia trying to get into a Russian museum, and eventually it's revealed that the two people are Hot Dog Water and Velma. And it's very strange because obviously they do explain it later, but at the beginning of the episode they don't really explain why Hot Dog Water is there at all. It's just kind of like, oh, Hot Dog Water is here now. I guess we kind of need to deal with that and work with that. But and then more interestingly, they're actually working with Mr. E and are trying to actually break into the museum, and we do eventually figure out why they are breaking into the museum. As we find out, there's an old Russian artifact called the Baba Yaga house, which if you guys are familiar with the legend of the Baba Yaga, it's this witch that lives in the woods, and it's one of those things where it's like if you come to visit her house and don't answer her correctly, she'll eat you. Basically, this is what the story is. But yeah, I mean, I'm not paraphrasing a little bit because I don't know the full story behind the Baba Yaga, but the Baba Yaga is interesting. But in case the duo arrives at the Baba Yaga house, but they can't get close to it because of security. But I do conclude that it is indeed what Mr. E wants, and they do indeed call him and tell him about the complications behind it. And Mr. E obviously points out that if they can't get into the house to find what they're looking for, then they're just going to have to buy it and break into it at a later date. And of course, it's at this point where while they're actually talking and actually leaving the museum, the security guard actually goes to poke his head around the Baba Yaga house, and suddenly the Baba Yaga herself, which is, I should mention at this point, it's just a little statue that's just kind of sitting on the porch. It comes to life and proceeds to attack the security guard, and that's the last we see of her. But or at least for the cold open. Meanwhile, back in America, the group is currently the Hot Dog Water and Velma are currently talking about something that they think is a good idea, and points out that and obviously Velma points out that it is apparently a terrific idea, and we're not told right away what it is, but we do find out what Hot Dog Water's real name is as we find out, and I kind of alluded to this back in her original main appearance, but I kind of had to cut it out, so it's new to you guys, but yeah, as it turns out, Hot Dog Water's real name is Marcy, and that's her full real name, Marcy Fleech. That's her full name. But yeah, of course she insists that Velma call her Marcy, and of course Velma is more than happy to do that. Meanwhile, Fred, Shaggy, and Scooby have come to school, and Fred is very confused about the fact that he's there, pointing out that it's been a while since he's been back and wonders how much things have changed. At which point Gary and Ethan, if you guys remember, these two guys have been recurring characters for a while up until this point, but they're pissed off at Fred specifically. Because they come back, obviously they refer to the gang as the Mystery Dorks and how they've returned, but they do go on to explain how they're specifically pissed at Fred, and of course Fred does kind of ask them how the team is as if nothing happened, but they do respond to him by throwing a ball at his face, which knocks him on his ass, and then proceed to tell him that because he up and disappeared, they lost their championship game, lost their scholarships, and now they're not going to college, all because Fred up and just vanished. And yeah, you can't really blame the whole fact that they lost the game on Fred, although Fred has been established to be a bit of a flake regarding his sports activities, so it does make sense that they would blame him for that. But You would think they would read the news or something about how Mayor Jones was involved in some sort of adoption scandal and had secretly driven away all the original Mr. Incorporated members. Yeah, you think they would read up on that, but apparently not. Apparently they're just like, Fred, you dumbass, you shouldn't have run off on us because we were trying to win a game. And yeah, apparently they didn't read any of that, and they just kind of blamed Fred for something that understandably wasn't exactly his fault. He had a bit of an identity crisis at the end of the last season. It's not his fault that he just up and disappeared. He had to go find himself, and also quite possibly his parents. But in any case, Fred is very happy about the fact that nothing seems to have changed, but then Shaggy remarks that one thing seems to have changed, and sure enough, he points over Fred's shoulder and reveals that Daphne and apparently Baylor Lautner, who it's not really explained why he's there. He just kind of is. It's not really explained why. Obviously he's a lot older than Daphne, and obviously shouldn't be in high school, but for some reason he's there holding her hand. I don't fully understand what's going on. Maybe he just took time off to be with her. I don't fully understand what's going on there. But yeah, of course Fred sees both of them and is very easily distressed and distraught. And of course Shaggy apologizes, pointing out that it's just something that can't be helped. But it's at this point where Fred just goes on a whole tangent about how he would like to openly create a trap. He basically just decides to trap Baylor Lautner in anger. He just makes the decision to just build a trap that would. The long story short, would be a Rube Goldberg machine designed to pin Baylor Lautner's arms to his side so that he couldn't hold Daphne's hand anymore. And but he ultimately decides against it, because obviously Shaggy and Scooby are walking back like that, pointing out that that's a little bit messed up. But of course, it's this point where Velma actually approaches the rest of the gang and reintroduces Marcy to all of them. And of course, obviously, Fred is very confused as to why she's there, because obviously the last time we saw her, she was arrested for posing as a manticore and trying to shut down her father's own amusement park. And she reveals that in actuality she was arrested for a brief period. And even when Shaggy and Scooby over with some homemade candy that she made inside her cell with her cellmates, but she does reveal that she was actually let go on good behavior. And also the fact that she redesigned the prison security system to be more brutal and unforgiving, which of course the guards were very happy about, and did wind up letting her go. They wound up taking off some time for her for good behavior, because obviously that was a very big thing that she did for them. And of course, after offering up candy to the two boys, they're very happy to have accepted her, and then also Scooby then points out that she does like how she smells like hot dogs, but of course Fred is still skeptical, because obviously he points out that he's not really sure if she'll fit the gang, but obviously Velma does point out that since Daphne's not coming back, and Fred seems to recognize that Velma points out that they obviously need a fifth person, because they didn't have their fifth person, they were unable to capture Crybaby Clown, and he was just able to get away. So for that reason, he does point out that they're going to need to keep an eye on them, and pick up a new gang member. And of course, Shaggy and Scooby openly accept Marcy with open arms. Obviously, Scooby likes her because she smells like hot dogs, and then she gave them candy. So, of course, they're going to be head over heels for Marcy and be more than happy to see her as part of the gang. And Fred, pointing out that everybody else seems to be okay with it, does reluctantly agree to make her part of the gang, but also points out that he's going to just continue calling her Hot Dog Water, because obviously he's not going to call her New Daphne, because to him there's only one Daphne, and does point out that obviously he doesn't know when or if she'll ever come back. So but for the time being, he's more than willing to happily work with Marcy. Meanwhile, at the Crystal Cove docks, we do see I don't know their names, but we do meet to Curator Vronsky, who is apparently who's apparently the leader of the, who is apparently the curator of the museum in Russia that Marcy and Velma broke into at the top of the episode. But he's there. He's apparently been responsible for actually shipping the Baba Yaga house to Crystal Cove. And also we do meet his assistant Anna, who's also there as well. And he's very confused as to why she actually came with him, pointing out that obviously he didn't really need her protection, and also points out that obviously he's more than capable of doing it. But she insists that she wanted to, because she's very prideful about the fact that of their Russian artifacts, and points out that obviously she doesn't trust bringing it to an American continent, but does point out that they'll ultimately get what's coming to them soon, which Curator Vronsky does note is a little bit ominous. But then, as they're unboxing the Baba Yaga house, it suddenly springs to life. Grabs Anna, throws her into the door on the house, and the house itself then proceeds to wander off, and knocking over a couple of shipping crates in the process. And of course, Curator Vronsky sees all of this and begins panicking, pointing out that the Baba Yaga house seems to have come to life, and by bringing it to American soil, he has in fact awakened its curse, and is kind of a little bit scared about that. And meanwhile, the gang with Marcy and Tel, they do start going through Crystal Cove, doing their rounds, and it's at this point where Fred tells them that obviously solving mysteries isn't all about building traps to catch the bad guy, and points out that there's a lot more to it than that, and that and he then proceeds to start going into details about the different ways to build traps and how to trap things. But then the police scanner, which apparently Fred installed at some point, and it does make sense that they would have a police scanner. Apparently the mystery machine is equipped with a police scanner, which is able to actually read police protocols and stuff like that. And the idea is that it's supposed to pick, and the idea is that the police are supposed to use that to communicate. That's what they do. Yeah, apparently Fred installed a police scanner into the mystery machine, and it's a good thing he did that, because right at that exact moment it springs to life, and what we find out is that apparently several members of the Crystal Cove Police Department have indeed spotted the Baba Yaga house, and one officer is calling another for backup, trying to explain how the Baba Yaga house almost drove them off the road, and of course the guy on the other end doesn't believe the dispatch officer for a second. He's very much like, "Can you repeat that, officer? I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. Please repeat that." And of course, after hearing the whole thing, Marcy insists that they should probably go investigate that, and Velma chimes in and agrees. And obviously they have ulterior motives, but they do agree to go and investigate the Baba Yaga house, and they do find out that it's apparently in a clearing in the old woods atop Crystal Cove. So they immediately go. So of course they then proceed to park the mystery machine and continue going on foot. Of course, since this is Marcy's first official investigation with Mystery Incorporated, she does ask if there's anything she needs to know. At which point, Shaggy and Scooby decide to feed her some advice, and obviously their advice goes in a complete circle of eating food, running away, and maybe cowering in fear. And of course, because that's a very circular thing, and that's not particularly helpful. Velma then proceeds to rip her away from Shaggy and Scooby and tells Marcy to ignore them, and then points out that the best way to absolutely look for clues, and the best way to solve any mysteries is just look for clues and look for things. And eventually, they stumble upon the Baba Yaga house itself, which they don't point is maybe the biggest clue they could find. And sure enough, Fred joins them shortly after and points out that it's not just a clue; it's the whole ass mystery. And they immediately approach the Baba Yaga house to try and figure out what exactly is going on and why it's coming to life. And of course, they immediately poke inside the Baba Yaga house, and but it's at this point where they're actually greeted by the Baba Yaga herself, who immediately becomes angry at the fact that they're on her property, or rather trying to enter her house without permission, and proceeds to start chasing after them on her little rocket thing, and starts trying to hit them with her cane. And of course she immediately starts trying to hit them and starts chasing them away, and of course, the gang immediately splits up and tries to get as far away from the Baba Yaga as possible. And eventually, once the Baba Yaga is satisfied that they're far enough away from the house, she immediately returns back to the house, and it springs back to life and starts wandering out of the woods and almost flattens Shaggy and Scooby in the process. And they just barely get out of the way of it. And of course, the gang is very confused as to what exactly is going on, but also points out that that's getting away. But then they notice something strange, and that the Baba Yaga house seems to be leaking some sort of strange fluid. And of course, Marcy seems to recognize what the fluid is, although she's not entirely sure where she's put it. And they do start following the fluid, but eventually realize that they're going to need to call the police and let them know what's going on. And sure enough, Sheriff Stone and Janet Nettles, they show up to investigate. And of course, Fred immediately tells them what's going on and what happened. And of course, Sheriff Stone does conclude that it is indeed a clearing, and also Curator Vronsky is there because obviously it's his exhibit that's running amok. Obviously, he's going to be very involved in the investigation. Obviously, he's going to look into it and help. But of course, Vronsky then points out that obviously he is very worried about the fact that the Baba Yaga may have awakened the Baba Yaga's curse, since obviously he points out that it's been running amok ever since it got there. And when they do ask him to clarify, he then reveals that and obviously they notice that his assistant is no longer next to him, since they recognize that his assistant is supposed to be there. Obviously, he then proceeds to point out that obviously Anna got abducted by the house, and he doesn't know what happened to her, which of course causes everybody to panic. And it's at this point where where Velma pulls Marcy aside, and they realize they need to call Mr. E and let him know what's going on. And they immediately call Mr. E and let him know that the Baba Yaga house is running amok, and they're still trying to find it. And of course Mr. E insists that they need to find it. And but he doesn't explain why. He just points out that obviously he tasked them with doing a job, and that they need to figure out what's going on, and tells them that they need to search for that house as if their jobs depended on it, which he openly admits he kind of does before he hangs up. And of course they think nobody heard them, but Scooby heard the whole thing. It's revealed that Scooby heard the whole thing, and it looks at both Marcy and Velma with concern. Meanwhile, Sheriff Stone is still very much insisting that he's the emergency mayor, even though Janet Nettles points out that he's not the mayor. But he doesn't. But of course, Sheriff Stone is very much trying to take after his quote-unquote predecessor, and points out that and tries to run the town like how Fred Jones Sr. would have. He's trying to look at the mysteries and be like, how can I make money off of this? That's very much a thing that he's looking into. He's like, how can I make money? But and of course he then proceeds to insist that they can look at the revenue for it. But Janet Nettles just tells him to do his job, and of course just dismisses the whole idea of it. But in any case, after this whole ordeal, everybody goes home, and what we find out is that and Shaggy already points this out. Fred has apparently been living in his old house by himself without his dad around, and it's unclear how that's actually going to work for the long term, because obviously Fred doesn't have a job. Obviously, he just got back in Crystal Cove. He doesn't have a job to pay for himself, and yet somehow he's living in his house. He's just squatting in his old house, which of course Shaggy and Scooby point out is probably not a good thing, and do point out that he probably shouldn't be living by himself. But then we find out that Fred actually has an old teddy bear named Mr. Trapples that he talks to, and points out that that Mr. Trapples has been keeping him company. And this only causes Shaggy and Scooby to become even more concerned. Obviously they look at they took one look at Fred talking to Mr. Trapples, and are like, yeah, I know, he's been living in his house by himself. That's not a good thing. But in case it's at this point where Scooby does indeed decide to come clean and tells them that they're actually that obviously Velma and Marcy are working for Mr. E, but he doesn't fully understand why. And Fred points out that obviously there seems to be something he doesn't understand either, but he does take a bit of a logical guess, which is that obviously he specifically left the gang and broke the whole gang up, and obviously most of Mystery Incorporated left town, which of course means that that obviously Velma would have been desperate to actually have gone into a bit of alliance with basically anybody, including Mr. E, and does point out that obviously they're going to have to she would have happily joined up with somebody if it meant solving mysteries again, but then proceeds to have an extended conversation with Mr. Trapples, and who suggests that they go look into it. And of course, the three of them then proceed to leave and proceed to get ready to go look for the Baba Yaga house again. And sure enough, Velma and Marcy then proceed to follow the trail of strange liquid, and eventually do find the Baba Yaga house in the middle of a bunch of trees, and eventually realize that nobody is home. They quickly find out that nobody's home and nobody seems to be there. So, of course, their immediate reaction is, hey, why don't we go inside? Let's see if we can find something. And of course, they immediately climb inside to actually go poking around, and immediately start looking around for things that are like, hey, what if we can figure out? Well, let's see if we can figure out where they would keep the thing we're looking for. And of course, they initially don't know what they're looking for. So Velma starts thinking in Russian, which is kind of funny, but she does eventually find what they're looking for, which is a large red wooden box. And upon opening it, it's revealed that the thing they were looking for was another piece of the Planispheric Disc, which makes 3 pieces now. And of course, Velma is very happy about the fact that they found the piece of the Planispheric Disc. At which point the guys then proceed to walk in. And of course, Velma is very confused as to why they're there or how long they've been there. But Fred merely tells her not to confuse him, because as he points out, time is very confusing for him. But of course, Shaggy then asks if she's actually working for Mr. E, like Scooby said. But and of course, Scooby even outright asks her as well, because obviously they feel very betrayed. Obviously, they feel like they can't trust Velma anymore. But then Velma proceeds to reveal that actually she's only working for Mr. E to a point. As we find out, she's only working with Mr. E because they have a common enemy in mind, Professor Pericles. And obviously, since Professor Pericles already has 2 pieces of the Planispheric Disc already, she does point out that they need to keep as many of the pieces away from Professor Pericles as humanly possible. And if that means kind of siding with Mr. E to be able to find the pieces of the Planispheric Disc, she's more than happy to do that. But points out that obviously she's always been on Fred's side, and points out that obviously she's been getting the piece of the Planispheric Disc for them. Obviously, she's not working with Mr. E to an extent. Obviously, she's only working with Mr. E as a means to an end. But of course, Fred seems to be happy about that, pointing out that he's happy that Velma's working with him. But and then proceeds to go and reach for the piece of the Planispheric Disc, when suddenly the Baba Yaga house comes to life with everyone in it. And sure enough, the Baba Yaga house, as it starts moving, starts shaking everybody around, and everybody starts being knocked into furniture and breaking valuable pieces of furniture and stuff like that. And eventually, one of them, in the process, the Planispheric Disc actually lands on top of Mr. Trapples and gets stuck in his eye socket, which winds up being a relevant piece of the story. But eventually, the Baba Yaga house then proceeds to spit all of them out, and they all go out the front door. At which point, the Baba Yaga then proceeds to appear from the window and insists that they should stay away from it. They should stay away from her house, otherwise they'll face her wrath, and then they'll never be seen again. And with that, the Baba Yaga then proceeds to cackle wildly before disappearing further into the woods. And of course, Fred is very happy about the fact that they've gotten the piece of the Planispheric Disc first and foremost, and does proceed to pick up Mr. Trapples, and is very happy that Mr. Trapples got the piece of the Planispheric Disc for them. And but then Scooby is a little bit less happy, because as it turns out, Shaggy apparently hit his head as he came out of the Baba Yaga house, and Scooby now thinks he's dead, which of course he isn't. But he does wind up becoming very hysterical and starts cradling Shaggy, and insists that he should be the one to bury him. And it's at this point where Shaggy woke up, having recovered from hitting his head, and then tells Scooby that no burying, because obviously he's not one of his bones. But of course, the two of them then proceed to cuddle each other. But then Marcy goes to investigate the oil slick that they found from earlier, and upon closer inspection, it is exactly what she thought it was. She then she sticks her fingers in it and does discover that it is indeed hydraulic fluid, which she points out obviously since she used to work in an amusement park with her dad, obviously she knows that what hydraulic fluid is, and obviously knows that it is something that can be that's very useful for robotics and movement and stuff like that. And upon even closer inspection, Fred finds a broken piece of something but he's not entirely sure what it is, and but does point out that he does indeed know somebody who can help. At which point, the gang proceeds to split up. Marcy and Velma then proceed to go off and go investigate the hydraulic fluid thing. While the guys then proceed to go to Daphne's house, even though Daphne openly admits that she's not very happy to see them and insists that Fred leave. And of course, Fred thinks that she's mad at the gang, so he brings that up. And even though Daphne points out very specifically that she's mad at Fred specifically, which he does clarify. He points out that however she wants to word it, he does point out that obviously he needs her help for old time's sake. And even though she very reluctantly agrees to help with that, but he then proceeds to pull out the piece of the thing that he found and asks her if she knows what it is, and then reveals that it's actually a piece of Fabergé egg. As we find out, she knows all about that because, as it turns out, her family used to have a whole bunch, but her mom kept trying to boil them because she's stupid, so they only have the one now, and it's locked behind an impenetrable, unbreakable glass. And of course, Fred then proceeds to thank her for her help, but then also points out that he very much missed her. And then proceeds to point out that he's always very happy about how smart she is and how good she is at finding clues. And she kind of is a little bit repulsed by that, but it's at this point where Baylor Lautner comes out, having apparently prepared the hot tub and apparently released dolphins into it, which is a little bit strange. But and of course he doesn't have any sort of beef with Mystery Incorporated. He sees them all and does greet them all as Daphne's old school chums. And of course, Fred insists that they're not staring at his abs when he asks them what they're up to. But then Baylor Lautner turns around and it's revealed that he actually has back abs, which aren't a thing. That's not how abs work. I should mention that. That is not how abs work. But yeah, he turns around. And Daphne apparently calls them babs. But he then proceeds to point. But then she insists that the rest of Mystery Incorporated leave, and of course they do. But now that Fred has the clue that they need, they then proceed to return back with Marcy and Velma, who have apparently investigated their own lead of their own, and of course, Fred is also revealed to just be still be very much upset over the whole Daphne situation, and Marcy tries to console him, noting that obviously it must be rough, pointing out that she's given them the cold shoulder twice. But he does insist that is fine. But then he's revealed that. But then he pulls out Mr. Trapples and tells him that that's all he needs. But she becomes a little bit creeped out when it's revealed that he's actually dressed up Mr. Trapples as Daphne, and he then decides to actually change the subject. At which point Shaggy then proceeds to ask them how their lead went with the hydraulic fluid, and sure enough, Marcy reveals that actually what they found out is that it's actually found in two places. Namely, it's found in amusement park rides, obviously, but also it's found in old freighters and ships, which of course Velma points out means that they have to now go to the Crystal Cove shipyard, and sure enough, they go do that and proceed to go investigate the freighter that the Baba Yaga house came in on, and of course, they then proceed to start looking around, start looking for clues, and start climbing onto the boat. And with Velma pointing out that obviously, if there's any sort of clue about the Baba Yaga house, it would be on the freighter where it came from. And sure enough, they start looking into it, and then the Baba Yaga house just kind of appears on the freighter. It kind of emerges from one of the lower decks and out onto the main freighter. And that makes sense. It's a giant. There would be a giant grate in the middle of the freighter where it would be stored. So obviously it came out of that, and then proceeds to actually chase off Mystery Incorporated before running into town with Fred rallying the rest of the gang, and they proceed to get into the Mystery Machine and chase after it. And sure enough, the Baba Yaga then proceeds to just kind of rampage through with her house through the entirety of Crystal Cove, even at one point breaking the sign to Crystal Cove. And it just runs through town and starts rampaging and starts destroying things. And of course Sheriff Stone and Janet Nettles, they see this. They see this whole thing, and they immediately start giving chase after it. And eventually, Fred is able to get drive in front of the Baba Yaga house to head it off. And at this point, he tells Scooby and Shaggy to grab the crossbows. And sure enough, they do. They open the back door, and they grab a pair of crossbows, which are revealed to be connected by a string of rope. At which point, they then fire both of them and create a tripwire, which just causes the Baba Yaga house to collapse. And then the Baba Yaga proceeds to escape her house, but of course, Janet Nettles and Sheriff Stone arrive on the scene, and Sheriff Stone immediately arrests the Baba Yaga. At which point, they then proceed to unmask the Baba Yaga to reveal that it's Curator Vronsky. Yeah, as it turns out, Velma, and as Velma explains, he was trying to smuggle Fabergé eggs out of the country, which of course, I'm sure Vronsky doesn't even deny this. He openly admits that obviously he points out that being a curator of a museum apparently doesn't pay much, even though I don't think that's entirely true, because obviously you work as a museum curator. Your job is to keep everything from history preserved. That is your main job. So yeah, the fact that he didn't think that, and obviously that's a very valuable job, because obviously knowing about history is important. But obviously he doesn't see it that way, and thinks that the only way that he's not making enough money as a curator. So he insists that the only way he was ever going to make money was by smuggling in Fabergé eggs and selling them on the black market. And reveals that he was actually on the Soviet Secret Services, which is how he made the Baba Yaga house move. As it turns out, he is very familiar with robotics and hydraulics and a whole bunch of other things. So he was able to redesign the Baba Yaga house to be able to move around and walk around. And he reveals that he actually hid the remote control in his walking cane so that he could control it remotely from wherever it was. And also proceeds to reveal that he obviously suspected that Anna knew that that's what he was doing. So he got rid of her before she could figure it out. So but of course he also reveals that while knocking over all the shipping containers that were in the shipyard, in the Crystal Cove shipyard, that actually wound up damaging the house, and he had to constantly stop to make repairs. But of course this didn't wind up working, because obviously Mr. Incorporated came close to finding him a couple of times in the middle of repairs, and obviously he pointed out that he couldn't let them do that, so he kept trying to chase them away while he tried to fix the Baba Yaga house so he can continue smuggling all the eggs. And he also reveals that in the process, he abducted Anna, and it's not revealed what happened to her. Apparently he abducted her, he just kept her hostage in the house. And obviously no, they never got to investigate the house very, very clearly. So they never actually found her until the very end, at which point she then proceeds to climb out of the house's chimney. And of course he insisted that they would have gotten away with it, but then uses the Russian slang for middling kids and their dog. And it's at this point where Anna emerges from the house and then thanks Mr. Incorporated for saving the eggs. She very much thanks them for saving their national treasure, and does reveal that she was indeed suspicious of Vronsky for the whole time, which is why she came there and why he got her out of the way. But does explain that because of them, the eggs are safe, and now she no longer has to worry about them. At which point the gang then proceeds to get back in the mystery machine, where they prepare to drop Marcy off, and of course Fred then proceeds to point out that obviously he very much appreciates having Marcy there and having her as a member of the gang, but then proceeds to go into a bit of a tangent about how he misses Daphne. Obviously, he points out that he doesn't feel like they can replace Daphne, and points out that she was one of those people who told him that dreams were possible, except for the obviously impossible ones, which he doesn't proceed to explain. But also points out that obviously she was the one who reassured him, who helped him out with all of his mysteries, and also helped him find clues. And obviously, the rest of the gang just kind of stares at him, because it's clear that he's having a bit of a breakthrough here. But of course, he does eventually realize that he's been rambling, and then proceeds to cut him off, realizing that he's more so offending Marcy than anything else. But then does re-insist that he actually does like having her around. At which point he drops her off at the house, and Marcy goes inside. At which point we see that Mr. E is actually in her house and was waiting for her. And And of course, what we find out is that Mr. E isn't particularly pleased about the fact that Velma betrayed him, revealing that obviously he saw the whole thing from his monitors, wasn't particularly happy about the fact that Velma gave away the piece of the Planet Spirit disc to the original to the new Mystery Incorporated, and and also proceeds to point out that obviously he doesn't feel like Velma can be trusted. At which point, Marcy insists that they can trust her, pointing out that obviously she doesn't feel like Velma would actually be the one to actually kind of betray them. But and also points out that they just need to give her another chance. But of course, Mr. E insists that Marcy shouldn't be making friends, revealing that the reason she's in Mystery Incorporated is because Mr. E specifically put her there to keep an eye on things. He put her there to be his eyes and ears, which of course means that she's very much on his payroll. She has no choice. So yeah, and of course it's at this point where he also insists that she shouldn't get buddy with Mystery Incorporated either, and then ominously states that their days are numbered. At which point the episode ends. So yeah, this episode obviously reveals that Marcy is actually a mole in the Mystery Incorporated now, because obviously she has to work for Mr. E and absolutely has no choice. But obviously this episode also continues the continuity from last episode. Obviously they needed a new member of Mystery Incorporated to fill in for Daphne until Daphne was ready to come back and work for them again, and obviously that meant that they would need to solve a couple of mysteries together with Marcy. But and obviously because of the Cold Crybaby Clowns incident, they were unable to actually solve the mystery for that one. So yeah, and that is indeed the next episode. The Crybaby Clown, they do eventually catch him. He's in fact in the very next episode they do, and that is indeed where the story's going to go next. So I do know that, but yeah, this next episode is going to be where they finally catch Crybaby Clown, or at least presumably. Yeah, it is interesting that how they had to bring in a new member. It just happens that Marcy is working for Mr. E, even though it's clear that she doesn't want to. It's clear that she doesn't want to work for Mr. E. Obviously she's grown to trust Velma. She doesn't want to work for Mr. E, and obviously Mr. E is a bit of a shady individual. Obviously he's been puppet mastering the entire series up until this point. So and so for the first half of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, he has in fact been working behind the scenes to help the Mystery Incorporated, so as an ulterior motive, so he could get the Planet Spirit disc. But obviously now he's not really working for them anymore. So obviously Marcy is hesitant on whether or not they should trust him or not. But yeah, this episode, that's going to be interesting. I'm interested to see what Mr. E is going to do now with the fact that he now has a mole in Mystery Incorporated. I'm interested to see how that's going to go. But in any case, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that I don't mind really saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!